Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, a podcast by MedComms experts. We share medical communications insights and advice from the best and brightest in the industry to find out what they're doing to push our industry forward. Here's your host, Wesley Portegies.
Welcome to Transforming Medical Communications, the podcast where we explore bold ideas to shape medical affairs. Today, we're joined by Erin Reineke, and she is a leader in global scientific communications at Sanofi. So with extensive experience across various therapeutic areas, Erin has been instrumental in driving communication strategies, integrating field medical insights, and also advocating for a more data-driven approach to medical communications. In this episode, we delve into how Erin is using data and field medical insights to tailor medical communications and how to move beyond traditional metrics to optimize engagement with HCPs. Erin, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here and, be part of the community to help exchange ideas so that we can all optimize what we're doing day to day.
Amazing. I'm glad to have you today and thank you for being here. So to kick things off, Erin, could you maybe share a defining moment in your career that shaped how you approach medical communications today?
Sure. It's not one specific event so much as when I started to get into medical communications, I realized that kind of it was going to be a culmination of all of my past jobs. So I am a PhD by training. I was actually visited by MSLs when I was in academia. Then I became an MSL myself, was giving end-to-end messaging, got into scientific communications and started developing MedComm content. And I realized that I was uniquely suited to really think through the whole process and use all of my background into optimizing that role and leading into work smarter, not harder, so that everybody along the way that's using the materials could really get the most out of them.
I really like that. And, of course, we're here to talk about using field medical insights and data to shape medical communication. So how did you come to be so passionate about that?
So let's take a step back on the MSL part of my career. So, the huge thing about MSL work is gaining insights to HCPs. Obviously, to do that, we're presenting data, you're getting their feedback on it, their feelings. You craft that into a specific actionable message that goes into some sort of system back at the company. Those are optimized, integrated, sometimes, AI, huge help here, is a big game changer, I think, in this, but those are all collated. And then once I got into a global role, what happens is you get some sort of readout of this. And understanding, I realized how that conversation happened, how that gets translated into a statement that goes into a system, and then you're reading it on the other end is really where you need to optimize that field conversation to the message and content and style of what you're making. And so that's kind of how I approached, doing my first MedComm materials when I needed to make them. And I realized this is not always a standard thing, as I was asking for the insights and trying to look through them to figure out educational gaps, trying to figure out how those conversations happened. And so I realized along the way that this is just something that we should be engaging field medical for making materials for them. It just makes sense to have them as part of that conversation, but then also use this back end of all of the work they've done.
Could you tell me more about where your interest comes from looking into leveraging field medical insights to shape medical communications content?
Yes, for sure. So this goes back to kind of what I said when I stepped into the MedComm role and needed to make my first resources for field medical. And you realize immediately, if you've had those experiences, your brain goes to, okay, how do I decide what goes into this, what it looks like? And really, the whole goal of field medical is to gain those insights, gain the opinions of the HCPs, how they feel about what they're talking about, take it back to the company to help mold strategy. And so that comes back to the company in insights, hopefully actionable and well-written. But when you're 2 steps removed from the field, these are just statements. And so at some point, somebody's read through them, summarized them, AI is really actually helpful here. That's a big advancement for field medical, but at a global role or at a content role, what you get is a summary of those statements. And that comes in, you can gauge for topics. You can gauge for tone to a point, depending on how it was written, but you're not always right there. We've all had an email that we thought we read one way or was written one way that was totally meant to be something else. And what's missing from those is also the questions asked, because it's just the answers. And so from a content perspective, I realized we need to do two things. Yes, we need to filter through those and find out where are the educational gaps, what's being talked about, what's being understood, what's not. And then also go back to field medical and find out how those conversations went and really link those together, because that's how we decide what the content should look like. What questions are we trying to answer? Are they understanding? And then you layer in all of the specifics. How much detail do we put in? What are they? Are they interested from a clinical standpoint? Are they interested from a data standpoint? How do we frame everything? And that's really, how I started to frame coming into medical communications. And then I realized not everybody looks at it that way. So a lot of MedCom are trained towards the content and from the strategy standpoint, which is fantastic. You take the medical objectives, the strategy, what we want. We're putting out content, but the end user is considered, but not part of the building phase. And so if it's an internal deck and for, clinical colleagues and cross-functional and commercial colleagues, you're going to make a deck one way. But if it's for field medical to use, that deck might have the same content, but look and feel entirely differently. And I mean that in the sense that it's optimized, obviously, for the HCPs, but also optimized for field medical to use. So that looks like, I think in an ideal world, you would not have a slide deck of, 30 slides. Almost nobody anymore has that much time to get an HCP in a single setting. But maybe this resource has a landing page, an executive summary with links that the MSL can easily in the office where the HCP is interested or where they framed, go to that same page every visit, but hit a different one. And so we're going into data this time, or we're going into burden of disease this time, or patient perspective. And so it's more like an onion model. You can go into that slide and still have a top line summary of data, but have it framed in such a way, say you have a clinical program that has 3 or 4 different studies with outcomes and then all of the post hocs that have done. If you just have a list of topics there, you might be able to get them more interested than just offering to them, this was our clinical study and this is what we did. And just kind of build out from there. So we can go into this, and you actually are then built in. It might be 150 slide deck that an MSL has gone through in 3 clicks to tailor that content. And they can leave the trailer for the next time. Oh, that's great. Maybe we can cover one of these topics in our next visit and, kind of keep interest. And so it's the exact same content, exact same build, just different.
Yeah, just different. Yeah. And it's kind of music to my heart to hear that, because I've actually spent a lot of time over the last many years to think about how we can make those interactions more, I guess, natural and organic versus the monologue that we kind of come from. And, personalization is so important, and listening to the person you're talking with and really understanding deeply what they need to hear versus just basically reading out your story is so important, right? So we have this concept that's called facilitated storytelling. So those are, it's kind of like what you said. They are PowerPoints, and they're very intuitively designed, and there's a smart navigation in there that makes it non-linear. So I really like to hear that, and I think that's definitely a great principle. How do the field medical insights factor into this when you talk about using field medical insights to optimize medical communications?
Yes. So, that first part is honestly just the summary and that culmination. Like, take it, look through what are HCPs saying, what are the high points, apply it to the strategy. Where are we hitting all of our medical objectives? Are we communicating across all of our medical objectives? Are the insights that are coming back in aligned with what we think we're saying? And so that is a specific to psychoms, like outside of your medical director, and like it's to really analyze it from that side, that viewpoint. Like, is the message what we think we're saying when it's coming back to us? And they are super helpful with that. And then, as I said, that next thing is just to take that step back, and usually it requires actually engaging field medical colleagues to say, okay, here are the gaps, or here are the interesting things. Here's what I need to know more of. How did this conversation go? And understand, as I said, what question was asked that led to that answer, because sometimes that will change an answer. Or if you ask this question, does the answer change? Usually they can gauge that. It's just not how the conversation went, so it's not what goes into the system. So, kind of coming full circle on that is a really nice way to make sure that the materials you're putting out are sending the messages that you want. They're getting the feedback back in that is useful to the company.
You're basically saying it's kind of like a double check whether things are received in the way they were intended to be said.
Yes,
correct?
sure.
Does the audience hear it as in the way that we were planning to, or that we wanted them to understand it?
Sure. A good example of end-to-end use of insights. I was in a disease state area, and we were just getting ready. We're putting out post-hocs of phase 2, just getting ready for launch, and the insights that were coming in. Now, this is a combination of field medical insights plus social media listening, because we had a comprehensive report that reached us at Global, really highlighted that people were understanding our drug MOA, but in the context of all of our competitors that we were trying to differentiate from. And so what wasn't coming through was the unique the uniqueness of the MOA, and specifically what that meant to a clinical outcome. And that was apparent because you were getting the same, I'm worried about these class effects. I'm worried about these same things. I don't see a benefit over that. I would never use it. It was an oncology drug in a different area. I would never use it because of what I know about its toxicity. And all of our messaging was around the same but different. And the whole part of different was missing because they weren't being able to internalize what it meant clinically. It's not that they didn't understand or we weren't giving the message right. It's that we weren't connecting all of the dots the right way to have that impact to them that would change clinical practice. And so we were able to go back in and build more specific but general materials to better link those steps through that weren't being made in, the HCPs' minds on their own.
Is MedComms evolving faster than your team can keep up? You're not alone, and you don't have to navigate it alone. Wesley Portegies, host of Transforming Medical Communications, is offering a limited number of 30-minute consultancy sessions for senior medical affairs professionals. Whether it's medical communications, field medical, or medical affairs training, these sessions are a chance to explore real-world challenges, pressure test ideas, and walk away with practical strategic insight. No fluff, just strategy. Book your free session now. Link is in the show notes.
So that means that, when you use these insights, you use them also to, in the process of creating new content, correct?
Correct.
So how would you go about that? For instance, and we might not be seeing that as an agency, right? So, but we build a lot of field decks, we build a lot of other materials, but I don't think I've ever gotten information from a client saying, "Hey, this we got from our field medical insights. here's a report with some statements that we should make sure we consider. So perhaps that they worked that already into the briefing in another way. I don't know, of course. But I'm just wondering if this is like a usual procedure, or is this really something you're advocating for and that we should do more of?
So probably both. I think to some point they're picked up in broader IEGPs and things like that when you have these cross-functional planning meetings internally. So by the time it would reach you at the content agency, maybe it's, been worked out. But also, I think there's more of it that needs done on a specific level. And so what I mean towards that is we just presented data at a Congress, and our field team is presenting the oral data in the field. Now, this could be consolidated infographic. This could be the exact slides used. Hopefully, messaging was written and highlights were made so that they know the key points that the company went through, that the messaging is clear. Sometimes it's done, sometimes it's not. Good point to optimize there to help your field teams out. But then what happens? So they have that conversation. They ask the doctor, how do you feel about this? Now, those are what goes into the insights. And they might say, oh, I'd like more data in this area, or I'm lukewarm. I don't think these results were that great, or this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm super excited. And hopefully they've dealt that, given that one question further, why do you feel like that? What's your driving? So we can take all of that and build it back in so that when we build that next generation messaging with that slide, we have hit those points that they were super interested in. And we can also then go back and highlight, I think the importance of this message was lost. Nobody seemed interested in this. Maybe it's a side note that we don't spend a lot of time highlighting. Maybe it's not impactful to our doctors. And you can build that better resource that puts your messaging through that's going to resonate with them and get, their interest more and more into the program.
Yeah, so it's really like a way to fine-tune your narrative.
Yes, in that case, for sure.
Yeah. How about applying these insights to other medical communications initiatives outside field medical?
So one is great. I'm sitting in an interesting new role for myself right now in pipeline, where I'm much more in tune and involved day to day with R&D and clinical than I have been in previous roles. And so a lot of the content we make is going to be internal or cross-functional, and you'll find each of these groups approaches what they need and what they want differently. And a lot of the materials that we're now making are going to be used towards, trialists and conversations with clinical trial investigators, trying to get them on board. And it takes a little bit of nuance to make sure you're hitting the audience right. What's the amount of detail that you need? Specifically, what are the words that you're saying that are going to make them interested versus the conversations field medical may be having with your general clinician. But also, from the user end and those conversations, what has resonated and what hasn't. And so when you're trying to get somebody, clinical trial on board, or trying to make it clear to an R&D colleague, we need to do this study because this isn't clear. That's how we use those insights. So like to the binding study I had, generally mentioned, like there might be data needed there to help solidify that. And so you use that to go have that conversation. What can we do to fill this gap? Is it just not clear? Or is there a link missing? Do we actually have it and I don't know about it? Is there another place for this? And so it really helps when you're trying to have those conversations to have the data and not just be hey, I've noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Have you seen situations where these insights were used like directly in content creation outside field medical? I'm just imagining hypothetical situation is you have a satellite symposium or something like that, you're organizing your narrative and your presentation for the satellite symposium. And I'm assuming like these insights could be extremely helpful to consider in what you're going to present there.
Yes, towards the same idea. I mean, for me, as I said, because of my progression, I logically do this as a part, like it's part of my content creation all of the time is to have them, but the educational need, the buy-in when you're making a Simpo, like you have to get those HCPs interested in what you're talking about and keep them engaged. And so knowing from the field what has been interesting or what has caused, a little constructive friction is another way, to keep that interest and address that and get, you're getting feedback even during symposia. And so those really help, build that agenda and, decide how you're framing things, if you're using them right. So you have a select group, but it's almost towards the same audience. So better from the insights what went well in the field, what didn't, and you can build that into your symposia and have a better chance at really making an impact and having success with that audience.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel that typically these insights make it to those other stakeholders internally? Are there good processes in place to do so? And if so, what are some best practices to make sure that everyone is aware of these insights?
I would say company to company, I have no idea. I would say department to department, it's probably very different. We built in processes to do this when they didn't exist, but also we had new field teams. And so there's a reason they didn't exist. So it might be that I would say probably field insights, country to medical directors happens a lot, but whether or not your scientific communication team is integrated in those reports, looking at those reports, varies wildly. And I think it's on the SciComm person to ask for them, to find the need, to figure out how to read it, to find the importance in this. And, but also to make it clear where the information came from so that if other people could also, gain valuable insight from this, it's widely available. It's not this small connection. Like that's a huge amount of work that they're doing. And I think it's a great way to amplify both internally and, in your own role to hit the mark better, refine messages, make sure that what you're doing has the best chance at impact.
Yeah. So what would you say in this particular topic was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome?
Getting internal buy-in to the benefit of doing it. It makes logical sense when you explain the why, but if it's not traditionally done, I think until people see what you're looking for, they get confused. There's sometimes internal friction or just hurdles between field teams and country and global that, maybe at the global level, all of these countries' insights aren't, collated, and it might be 4 or 5 reports that you're needing to look through. And you have to make it clear that, at a global level, you're making materials for everyone, that messages might be different coming from different regions and material needs might be different coming from different regions. And so it's really just making sure that everybody understands like, hey, we can do better by this, and making sure that the field team doesn't feel like they're being judged for the insights when they're coming in, like truly coming to them for help and, getting their feedback and being open to change things. Sometimes people can get defensive or protective, and it's really a barrier across the board to, putting out the best materials.
Yeah, and I heard you mention the, collaboration between global and local organizations, which, and we actually recently did a survey among the industry, and that was indicated as one of the biggest challenges. I think 77%, I think it was, of the people surveyed indicated that they had challenges in that particular area. Now, in this particular case, in a global role, it means you collect these insights not just from where you are, right, but from all over your territory. So how do you go about bringing consistency and insights gathering across these different regions and making sure it actually makes it up to you?
Yeah, I think that's hard. As I said, I think moving forward, AI is going to help a lot with this. I know, the collating everything that goes into, Viva CRM or whatever your reporting system is, and being able to take that as a group, put a few qualifiers on it, and ask for certain questions and readouts is really going to help. But also just understanding that even when you do that, some regions might have 5 MSLs where other regions have 30. And so you'll still have to go in and look and talk. Like, it's still a conversation at the end of the day. What are your specific needs? What are you hearing repeatedly? What's working, what's not working? And I think that part of the equation, it can't just come from that report. Like, you need to go and have that conversation where it's not clear, or where you've identified something and make sure you're thinking about it the way it happened is really crucial.
We have these insights, right? So your MSL teams are bringing and gathering these insights towards you. Then they're being analyzed, and then you're utilizing this, just like we discussed, right? But at the same time, the MSLs themselves, they are the ones collecting this, and they have a really, in my experience, have a really, really strong view on how you could shape content to make it more relevant to the HCPs. What I don't see so much is them being involved, where possible, in the content development. What is your view on that?
So I'm actually greatly in favor of this as a practice. They have the best understanding of what works in the field, what doesn't, how much time they're getting, what can be easy to use and what not. And I think across the board, we're all understanding that in today's world, short content with the option to go into more detail is kind of optimal in most situations for field medical. But I believe that, there are 2 places where they can be super helpful in content creation. One's at conception, are really identifying the detail, the amount of detail that should be in that material that they're going to use. The specific words they use in some TAs is very different. You have some, TAs that are MOA driven, very science pathophysiology, and you have some that are very, very clinical, and you need to put everything in general clinical terms, or they're not going to follow your path with you. And then they have not internalized the messages that you're trying to get. So it's just towards the functionality and content per se. I think they are a great resource for identifying that up front and being part of what that asset should look like. But then also in the second part, and I think this isn't done quite as much, but is really involving them with taking the asset at the end and helping their team understand, this is why it was created. These are the messages that we're trying to do. And this is where we can use it in the breadth of all of the other information that we have. Because, you almost never just have one asset. And to every, 1 or 2 assets you're using in the field, there are probably another 3 or 4 supporting internal assets that have more and more detail. And so I think a great place for field medical to help is taking that. I think they're often called adoption ladders or belief ladders. And, sometimes that's a clinical term or commercial term, sometimes medical, but, you have an HCP that you've identified as somewhere between, I know nothing about what you're talking about, and I'm an expert at what you're talking about, and you need to constantly try to push them further. And so there are specific ways that can help have that conversation, and having the MSLs come in and be part of that process to say, oh, we can use these materials here to get them between these steps, or you might want to use these at a higher step. And I think one, that makes for better understanding, two, better insight collection, like generation at the end, but three, it also gets their buy-in and all of them using the resources at the end of the day. Because the last thing that you want as a MedCom person is to build something that nobody's using.
Yeah, absolutely. Or receives a lot of pushback.
MSLs are usually very eager to be involved. They love to help with this. It's just making sure, as I said, that everybody understands why the help is useful, who best to give the help, what type of time commitment. It is not, necessarily part of their job description. And so that can be sometimes where friction points, as you said, can come up.
So how would this practically look like? Is this like a matter of identifying some really high-performing MSLs and inviting them to the table when you decide to create new field resources?
That's often how it went for me. Recently, I actually have two MSLs working very closely with me, but they are ones that came up to me when we were just rolling out a new TA and said, hey, this is a passion of mine. If you need any help, I'm here. And it actually worked out great because I have one that has a very clinical background and it happens to be a very clinical driven TA that doesn't match my background. So for me, it's great because I have somebody that was on the other side receiving the information and, who best suited to help me tailor that messaging. And another that actually had a background in psychom. And so he can help with this back end building out, how do we get field medical to understand and drive these messages that are driven, these objectives that are driven by medical. And it's really just having conversations, finding people eager and interested and doing it in a way that they're gaining expertise from it just as much as you're gaining output from their help.
Yeah, and I guess this also means you can involve the local organizations a little bit more and better, right? So that their local needs are represented.
Yes, for sure. So in past TAs, I've done it as, a workshop where we had, all of the country affiliates, a medical director, we asked them, but also we asked for another representative, an MSL representative that was interested in helping this process and putting everybody on the same level playing field, asking for expertise and input from across. And it really helps with understanding each other better too, because it might be that in Asia, the considerations are totally different than what people in the United States are getting, and having those MSLs talk, not just the medical directors talk, can really lead to, some unique things that you can better highlight.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, imagine someone is listening to this episode and they kind of want to leverage the topics we have discussed here. What would be the three things they would need to consider, or where they would need to start out?
So I would say, one, make sure that you have a good understanding of what field medical is bringing to the table. Hopefully, we're already starting from a place where there is an understanding of that, but sometimes not. I mean, it's not a traditional part of medical communications training. So whether that is, maybe you can go on a field ride and understand how that conversation happens and where the insights come from. At least have some conversations and understand the process so that you understand the output. So start there, have conversations with field medical leadership, with medical directors regionally, globally, find out what's happening with the insights. Where do they go? If you're already getting that report, fantastic. Start thinking about it from a different lens. Maybe you're already doing all of this, which is great. And then go and tell your colleagues to do it too. Explain the importance of it. But really consider what parts of these you're doing or not, and start having conversations to see where it makes sense.
Nice. Very clear. So time is going fast. So we're about to wrap up here, but before we do, I wanted to ask you, so what would be a topic that you would like to hear more about in a future episode of Transforming Communications, and why?
A future episode, I would love to hear more about how different companies are leveraging AI and digital, especially with restrictions on social media sharing, but from a purely MedCom perspective. So, corporate comms often gets to put out very generic or tailored social media, but from a MedCom perspective, we're being pushed more and more, engage your DOLs, do this, but usually there's a lot of guardrails on what you can do. And to a point, it's almost, we're being told to do it, but also we can't do it. And I'd love to hear more about what other people are doing in this space to get over the hurdle.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great topic. I'll add this to the list. In the meantime, thank you so much, Erin, for sharing your insights here today. This was extremely helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I did.
I loved it. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to hearing more perspectives from other people, too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Transforming Medical Communications is brought to you by MedComms Experts. To find out more about MedComms Experts and how we create some of the most cutting-edge medical communications programs anywhere in the world, visit www.medcoms-experts.com. And then make sure to search for Transforming Medical Communications in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at MedComms Experts, thanks for listening.